Let's begin. Okay, so the Gemara that we learned, let's basically the new Gemara we started was on the bottom line of page 50b and continued on to 51a, and that Gemara started with Rav Papa's statement about um, the argument of Iker Shira B'Peh or Iker Shira B'Kli seems to be connected to a brisa that talks about who actually played the instruments during the songs that when they're bringing the carbon tamid, they bring the daily sacrifice. Who actually played the music? So if Iker Shira Bakli, you had to have kosher people playing, which basically means the Levium, who was supposed to be that's the main Shira, the main song is the instruments. So when we know the Levium are the ones who were supposed to be playing those instruments, singing those songs. So it must be that the instruments were played by the Levium. And on the other hand, if the main songs was the vocals, and that's what the Levium was singing, then who cares who actually plays the instruments? You could have even Avodim, you'd have the Avdi Koyanim, the servants of the Koyanim, maybe played the instruments. It didn't make a difference really, because the the mitzvah of the songs that went along with the pouring of the wine ceremony, the shira that was being sang, that mitzvah was really the song part of it, the vocals. The instruments didn't make a difference. Okay, you have the instruments played with anyone, and so that seems to be this machlokes here about who was eligible to play those instruments. We have a three-way machlokes. Now it's interesting that the Gemara like jumps to this idea. Rav Papa, what was Rav Papa really thinking? Because there is three opinions here, and the way he's explaining it is that it's either one way or the other. You either hold Ikashira B'Peh or Ikashira B'Kli, but that's gonna mess. It's gonna mess you up when you have three opinions. We have to. How are you explaining the third opinion? One opinion we understand will say avodim work. You can have even avodim, even servants can be playing instruments because Iker Shira is B'Peh. Then you have the other opinion that says you need Levium because Iker Shira is B'Kli. You need kosher instrumentalists. But then you're going to have, what about that middle opinion? I mean, what are they going to hold? In fact, the Gemara asked that question, where the Gemara says, "Do you really think so? What does Rabbi Yossi really hold? What's that middle opinion? What's this? Who's the source of that middle opinion? In other words, what's his basis for his view? So what was Rav Papa really thinking when he jumped to this conclusion? That's an interesting question of in this Gemara. What was the Hava Amina? What was the thought process? But the Gemara concludes and says, yeah, we must say that there must be something else that's behind this argument. And what is behind this argument um, of these three opinions? And the Gemara says basically the argument has to do with the wording of the Gemara is what was the story? What actually happened? What did people do? Did they have avodim? In other words, you're allowed to use however you want because everyone agrees Iker Shira B'Peh that the songs that were done by the vocalists, they had to be Levium. The musical instruments could be anyone, but practically at least the wording of the Gemara sounds like Just the question is, what was the practical thing? Who actually played it? Now, Rashi doesn't seem to learn exactly like that, the way I just said. Rashi seems to learn a little differently, that it's based on a halacha. It's not just what was practical and what practically happened. What was the what was the story that happened, at least that which it is the way it sounds from the wording of the Gemara, but the way Rashi understands it is that there the the fact that some people would stand on the platform and play musical instruments, it led to people marrying into those families and people giving miser to those people because that was like an endorsement. If they oh, you're the one who plays instruments in the Beis Hamikdash. Oh, okay. You have a daughter. I have a son. That's a good shidduch. I'm not going to look into your lineage because you're basically you're there in the Beis Hamikdash. You shouldn't don't have to worry about you. And so that type of idea where it's Mylin Miduchen Leyuchsin or Mylin Miduchen Lemeiser. These type of ideas where you sort of you are endorsed by the fact that you're from a duchen, from the platform of playing music. We elevate you to a high level of yichus, or a level of meiser, where we trust that you're a Levi, and that is that idea is the basis of who we allow to play music in the Beis Hamikdash. So according to Rashi, again, so now let's sort of clarify what the way Rashi is learning this. The way Rashi is learning this is that because people relied on the platform, people who played music on the platform, people relied on that as a source for people's lineage and for people's considered to be Levium. So that is a reason why we allowed certain people to play music and certain people not. In other words, according to one rabbi, Reb Meir, let's say, he says that the people who played music were avodim, were servants of the kohanim. He held that just because someone plays music on the platform, that doesn't make the community think any greater of them. So Reb Meir says that's not an endorsement to nothing. They played music. They're good instrumentalists. They knew how to play. Uh, that doesn't prove anything, and we don't have to. People will still have to look into the lineage, and that's nothing. But then comes along Rabbi Yossi, says no. People if they see you playing instruments in the Beis Hamikdash, people are going to trust that you're a good family, and people are going to rely on that and going to look less into you. They're not going to do any research. They're going to rely on that. So according to Rabbi Yossi, what the rule was, you needed to be an Yisrael Meyuchas. You needed to be an Israelite with good lineage. And according to the other opinion, Reb Chanina ben Antignais, he says if you play music, people are going to use that as an endorsement that you're a Levi, because they're going to be we just give, when we're not sure who to give our tithes to. We look at the platform. We see someone, you're play music. Okay, you're a Levi. That's good enough. That's good enough for me. It's good enough for the Beis Hamikdash. It's good enough for me. He can play music there. If it's good enough for Hashem, that's good enough for me. I'm going to give him my tithings. And so the way Rashi is learning this is this whole machlokes, the arguments are based on what people rely on, what people assume based on based on that is what we allow people to do. In other words, if I think people assume that people's lineage are good, then I'm gonna make sure that I hold that you have to be a Yisrael Miyuchas. You need to be a Israelite with lineage. If I think that people assume that you're a Levi, then we're gonna say that we should only have Levium actually playing music. And if I don't think people assume anything, then I would say then we could allow anyone, even Avadim, can be playing music. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, wouldn't that be a similar case with if Kohanim were sending their slaves to collect their gifts? People might think that the slaves were Kohanim.
Kohanim. Is there such a discussion
I
that
think
you're
there's
familiar with?
there's a discussion else.
Because I mean, certain gifts, Avadim were eligible to eat. They're eligible to receive. It would seem that, well, I don't know if they're eligible to receive. They were eligible to eat. What does it say about Kinyan Kasboy? Can't think of the pasuk, but there is a pasuk about the avodim eating the truma, because now if they're a sachir, they're just a worker, they're not allowed to eat the truma. But if they're but anyway, it probably is some type of a Gemara that you're remembering about the avodim. But anyway, bottom line is that it boils down to this thing that people rely on that, and therefore we accustom ourselves to only allowing certain people to be playing music. But really, the main point that we're concluding out of here is from the whole argument, the three-way argument, is that everyone holds that Ikar Shira is Befeh. The main Shira, the main song is vocals. And the instruments, it's really a free-for-all. It's just that we have a problem of Mylin Miduchin Leyuchsin or Meiser, just because we have a problem, people are going to end up relying on this, that we sort of have to make rules. But we have to make rules so people don't make mistakes and rely on things they shouldn't be assuming. But really, in essence, the essential law of who can play music, according to all these three opinions, is that anyone could play music. Just that people are going to rely and assume that you're a Levi, or if people are going to assume that you are Yisrael Miyuchas, so with good lineage. So then, because of that, we have certain rules who it is and who's the ones who can play. Now, Taisus doesn't like Rashi's pshat, and he says it doesn't sound that way from the Gemara, because the term in the Gemara sounds like what was the story? Hachi having Maisa, Mar Savar Hachi having Maisa, Mar Savar Hachi having Maisa. It sounds that that we're not making rules based on a halacha or based on the fact that people rely on and assume things. It's and therefore there's a halacha about it. It sounds like it's that this is what people do, and based on what people do, maybe that would be the meaning of Mylin Miduchan Leyuchsin, meaning it's sort of flipped upside down, or flip it around. In other words, the way Rashi is learning is that who's allowed to play music, it's based on our ruling about who can we assume is a kosher Levi or a kosher Israelite. As we start off with the kosher, with the duchen, and that tells us who can play. When Taisa says no, it's the opposite. First, we decide who plays. And once we know who plays, then we could say, oh, since people like this play music, then we are Milan Miduchan Liyusin. Oh, it's all Levium who play. All right. Well, then, since that's what happens, since it's always Levium, and that's why we could be Mila Miduchan Lamaiser. We could say, oh, well, it's Levium who play. And according to the other rabbi who says it's Yisraelim who play, we would say, oh, these are Yisraelim Yuchasim who play. So if you want to get married to one of those Yisraelim Yuchasim, you could you could just rely on that. So in other words, the halacha of Mylin Miyuchsin, that we use that as a proof to someone's yichus or someone's Levi status, that idea is based on what people practically do in the Beis Hamikdash as regards to playing music. Who do we have there playing music? So this is Taisus's way of understanding it, and the way he says it is Mar Savar Hachi Avi Maisa Shalaviyam Hayabikim Klishir. The master says that the Levium were the ones who were experts at playing music, and because of that, if the Levium were the experts at playing music, so it comes out that if you see someone there playing music, you could give him your Meiser, because the Levium are the ones who were the experts. Then the other opinion says, no, the slaves, the servants were the experts at playing music. Oh, if that's the case, we can't rely on anything. They're all slaves. We can't say that they have yichus, so they accept Meiser. And according to the other opinion, it's the Yisraelim Yuchasim that were the experts at playing music. And based on that, we could say that because the Yisraelim Yuchasim are the ones who were experts at music, we would say, oh, listen, if you want to look into one of those families, then you could marry into those families even without looking into them. You don't have to do too much research because they have yichus. You look into their personalities maybe, but yichus you don't have to worry about. They're the ones who have yichus. So Taisus understands it that way, and the reason he understands it the Gemara that way is because the Gemara's terminology is is this the story or is that the story? It sounds like it's what people did was sort of like optional, and that's what happened. Once people did it this way, it would always it was the Levium started doing that. Then because of that, a halacha came about based on, oh, it's always Levium. Okay, so then we could assume that they're Levium. You're allowed to assume that you could give them Meiser. It's, oh, the people are always Yisraelim. Okay, then the Yisraelim Yuchasim, fine. We could assume that they're good, that they're a kosher yid. And then if you want to talk about if it's avodim, okay, it's avodim. So we know that they're not acceptable, and we can't just marry into them. So that would be the way Taisus understands. Again, Rashi learned it the opposite way, and it was based on what the halacha is like. Can we rely on these people? Okay, we can assume that they're a Yisrael Miyuchas. Fine. So now you know what? Let's allow Yisrael Miyuchasim to play music. So it starts with halacha. Who do we assume is good enough when we see them playing music? And then we'll say, okay, so then let's allow those people to play music. And if we don't assume anything and we don't assume that they're kosher, so then we would hold you can have avodim play music. So again, it's a question is what's the beginning of this, and where does it what does it start with? Does it start with the halacha of the assuming, or does it start with the practical facts of what happened, what people do, and that leads to the halacha about assuming? Yes, Jeffrey.
So I'm very curious. Nobody is quoting any psukim. As far as I know, in the Torah, the assumption that what the Leviim do is to sing vocally because of the word v'sheres. The word v'sheres.
You want to know psukim about if the mitzvah is with instruments or if the mitzvah is with vocals. Is that what you're wondering? Yeah. So the
And
Gemara
no,
is going to say that we're going to reach that, Mr. Hashem, a little later. That's right. Right before the Mishnah on today's page is is going to bring in some psukim. Not
of
really
course,
chumash psukim. They're really from Divrei Hayamim, but at least it's a pasuk, so it'll
but
satisfy you
it all
somewhat.
it all starts with the chumash though, because the
Right.
word sherei sounds like singing, and it could mean serving. A different kind of word has more than one meaning, but it says there that that if a Levi comes to Yerushalayim, he can do any of the jobs. He's qualified, and that he can share what they eat, whatever. Also,
I mean, sheres really means to serve.
correct. Correct.
So it's inclusive maybe of in addition to whatever else they
Right.
did.
So nobody is saying this that it's indirect. It's not direct in the psukim, and so how can you have this price that doesn't refer to it? You said something's going to happen now.
Well, let me just cut you off. The discussion that we're having now is not really a discussion of instruments versus vocals. The discussion now jumped to a whole different discussion, which is assuming who is the one playing, who are the ones that are playing, and can we assume that they are kosher Levites or they're not kosher Levites, they're Israelites, and so on. So it's not really about the actual mitzvah of the playing. That it sounds from the Gemara that we don't really have any clear halacha about the actual musicians, and it's sort of based on either it was totally a free for all, or it's based on a rule of the assuming rule. Are you allowed to assume that someone is a kosher Levi if they play or if they're not? In other words, but the actual halacha about the music. Okay, well, we'll soon see how that, where we find sources for that, or if there is any source. As Ikar Shira is Bepeh, what is the source? Is this rabbinic, and so on? So let's just wait for when the Gemara sort of like ties that together, ties those things, ties it up. Yes, David.
There's a footnote here. Unfortunately, there's no source. Rabbi Steinsaltz says, the reality was that the best musicians happened to be slaves. And since in the opinion of this sage, it was not required to have men of distinguished lineage serve as the musicians, these slaves played the instruments in the temple.
So it sounds like he's touching on the way Tosfos understands it, that these were the best musicians. The wording I don't think fits perfectly with Tosfos, but it does sound like he's relying on the Tosfos's understanding. In other words, Tosfos does mention that idea that the Avadim, according to one rabbi, the Avadim were the best at playing. According to the other rabbi, the others were the Levium were the best players. Just the way he worded it makes it sound like he's following Rashi's understanding of the halacha of Mailan Miduchan Liyuchsin. That halacha sort of is the basis for what the people did. Read again the way he said it, because it does sound to me like he's mixing Tosfos with Rashi's pshat.
Okay, this is on the words Avdei Kohanim Hayu.
Okay.
The reality was that the best musicians happened to be the slaves. And since in the opinion of this sage, it was not required to have men of distinguished lineage serve as the musicians, these slaves played the instruments in the temple.
Yeah. See, the way Taisus would have said that would be, well, I guess that commentary is really earlier on in the Gemara, so you could say he's really talking before we even come to the final conclusion about Milan Meduchin Leyuchsin. So yeah, I guess that's okay. What he says, he's really just talking in the Gemara's initial thought of who is is the Iker Shira Beper or Bekli. That's like right at the beginning of the page, right? That note that's it's based on the first words of the top line of the Gemara. So right, he's basing it on that time when it mentions it, or it's when it's mentioned later. And again, the avodim is mentioned a few times in the Gemara. So there's the top of the page, and then there's like 15 lines down. That note.
The note is on
The top
they climbing how you.
On the top of the page, the top line.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So he's really before it gets into the real discussion where we okay. In any event, yeah. So there is such a we did see that in the way Tosis even learns later on is that it's because they were the experts. We did see that's what Tosis seems to spell out, that they were the experts who were. I guess you have to say that because, like, why would they be the avodim and not other people? Like, what would what caused the it's sort of like a question. Well, why? Why was the Abdei Kainim the ones who were playing music there? And I guess gives it a little understanding, probably because they were experts. That would be why they would have been the ones chosen.
Maybe they were experts because they had a lot of free time on their hands. That was their only thing to do. Whereas the other people had things to do besides.
Yeah, well, I don't know. See, now you're adding because they have free time on their hands. I don't know. I would think that the avodim are the ones who have zero free time because the people who hired them want them to work. But maybe before they were slaves. What?
Maybe their main work is to play the instruments.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're avodim of they're servants of the Kayanim. They're not servants in the Beis Hamikdash. But anyway, it could be because before they decided to become slaves, they were musicians who could not make a living, so they decided we'll become slaves. I'm just saying, maybe because they used to have a lot of free time on their hands. I'm just saying it's not it's not exactly. We don't know what the real story is, why they were experts, but for whatever reason they were experts. Yes, Jeffrey.
So, do we know where the Duchan was? I'm wondering, how can these people be near the sacrifice? It seems to me they would have to be in the outer court if they're not going in.
Yeah, the commentaries mention about the what does it really mean? What is it really referring to when it says duchen here? What steps? Which
There's a footnote also. It says on the duchen, it says to be precise. Some say that the Gemara is not referring to the actual platform of the temple upon which the Leviim stood and sang, but rather to a different location where the musicians stood. See Tosfos. The musicians at the celebration of the drawing of the water clearly did not stand on the platform at all.
Yeah, so there's a discussion about exactly where they were, what it refers to specifically, the actual duchen here. But we have this debate here between these three rabbis, and the Gemara at this point says that their opinion is all based on that the Iker Shira is Bepeh and not the Kli. Okay, now that was a Gemara with discussion about Iker, what the Iker Shira is, and it was all in connection with Rav Yosef's way of explaining this debate about different laws that we find. In other words, is it Deicha Shabbos? Can you make kalim out of wood? Klishares, holy vessels out of wood? And he was connecting all of these ideas with with this debate of Iker Shira. What is the Iker Shira? And it really boiled down to our Mishnah, because our Mishnah had mentioned 50a about the Chalil, could it be played on Shabbos and Yontif? And the Mishnah says no. The Gemara brought a brisa that Sabachloikis, but so that's how we got into this whole discussion with this brisa, is Iker Shira b'peh or Iker Shira b'kli. But now the Gemara switches gears, and the Gemara says that you have Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, who says that we got it all wrong. The machlokes, the argument of shir shel of these two opinions, is not about the songs that were played on a regular basis with the korbanos, with the wine libations, but rather this whole argument about if it's Deicha Shabbos or not is only on the Sukkah's water drawing ceremony. However, when it comes to the daily songs that were done with the sacrifice, with the daily sacrifice, everyone agrees that it overrides Shabbos. That was very significant. Now, he doesn't explain what he holds. This is Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba's qualification of the debate. We have a debate. We don't know what exactly the debate is on. What case is this debate? Is it on the Shoeva ceremony music, or is it on the daily music? But the way Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba presents it, he says the argument is on the Shir Shel Shoeva. It's on the water drawing ceremony music. That's what they argue about. Is it override Shabbos or not, that music? But it doesn't, they don't argue about the daily music. That for sure override Shabbos. But he presents it in this way, but he doesn't say the reason. Is it because the main shira is bepeh? Is it all about vocals? So musical instruments are not significant. Is that one way? And because they're not significant, there's room to say that maybe it's allowed on the musical instruments are insignificant, or they are significant, maybe because they are significant. That's why it could override Shabbos. He doesn't really spell out which opinion. Of course, it would be nice to say, it would fit very well if you say that the musical instruments are significant, and that's why they override Shabbos regularly, and just for the Shir Shel Shoeva they don't. But he doesn't spell that out. Again, he doesn't. He leaves it. He doesn't talk about that discussion, and so the commentaries, of course, are unclear if Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba is following that same logic or not. In other words, maybe you could say that even if you hold that the main music is the vocals, and nevertheless the musical instruments they override Shabbos on a daily basis. You could say that, because he's not limiting each view based on what is the main shir, Iker Shira, what is the main song. No, he's not basing it on that. And so there is room to say that he's not limited to explaining it that way. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba doesn't really talk about that. We'll come back to it after, but this is Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah is really just saying that the shear, the daily shear, everyone agrees is Doicha Shabbos, the daily music that's override Shabbos. It's the water ceremony, the water drawing ceremony, which is done at night. And throughout the night, that music, was that Doicha Shabbos or not? And that's where you have a machlokes. And the Gemara goes back and forth. The Gemara tries to, the Gemara seems very clear that what Rabbi Yirmiyah, the Gemara proves that what Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says is correct, but it tries to not push off Rav Yosef's. In other words, could we at least keep one statement of Rav Yosef? And the Gemara says no. Ultimately, he's proven wrong in both of his statements. Rav Yosef tried to qualify this debate, and he says they argue in this case and they agree in that case. And so he said, okay, you're wrong about one of those, but what about the other one? And you said they all agree in one case, and we just found that they argue in that case. What about the case that you say they disagree? Maybe that's correct about the case that they disagree. And the Gemara says, no, even that you're wrong about, because they agree in that case. And we basically brought proofs, and the proofs all prove that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was correct, and Rav Yosef was wrong. That's called, the Gemara's term for that is tiyufta. We have rebutted his claim, and we've proven him wrong. So that's the Gemara. The Gemara basically brought brises that prove this, a brisa, and brought a proof from our Mishnah, and the proof from the brisa was the brisa itself says, "Shir shall what is the brisa? Shir shel sheyeva doicha es haShabbos. Divrei Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Af yom teveinu doicha. You have a clear brisa where it spells out what's the argument. The argument is about the water drawing ceremony music. Is it doicha Shabbos or not? This is the shir of the sheyeva. So it basically spells it out that this is where they argue. And Rabbi Yosef wanted to say everyone agrees that it's not doicha Shabbos. So Rabbi Yosef has now been proven wrong when he said this is everyone agrees, and we just proved that no, this is where there's an argument about it. And then the Gemara says, what about the daily music? What about there? Rav Yosef want to say that's where there's an argument, and Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says no, everyone agrees over there that it's doicha Shabbos, it overrides Shabbos. The Gemara says, does this prove Rav Yosef wrong in that place as well? The Gemara tries to say, no, maybe not. You could say maybe really they argue in both cases. They definitely argue in the case of the water drawing ceremony, but maybe they also argue in the case of the daily korban music. Maybe there's an argument if it's doicha Shabbos. And the Gemara says you can't really say that because our Mishnah, the Mishnah basically spells out. Our Mishnah had said, "Zehu hachalil shel beis hashoeva," that only the chalil of beis hashoeva is where there's only the chalil of beis hashoeva is where you where Shabbos, you don't override Shabbos, which means that in the other case, in the case of the daily music, that will override Shabbos. In other words, the Mishnah added words by saying Zehu hachalil shel beis hashoeva. That makes it very clear that there is going to be a difference between the beis hashoeva music, that it doesn't override Shabbos, and the daily music with the daily sacrifice that does override Shabbos. So there has to be a difference, and that difference has to be in the opinion. It has to be in the opinion of the Gemara says you can't say. There's the Gemara over here. you can't say it's Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda who's lenient because he says Shir Shel Shayeva is Deicha Shabbos. It doesn't fit Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. So you have to say that our Mishnah is the rabbis, and in the rabbis, what you're going to end up saying is that the rabbis hold that the daily sacrifice is Deicha Shabbos, and it's only the water drawing ceremony music, that music is not Deicha Shabbos. So it comes out that everyone agrees on the daily music that it's Deicha Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda always says it's overrides Shabbos, even in the water drawing ceremony music. That music also overrides Shabbos. For sure, the daily music overrides Shabbos. So according to him, it's for sure overrides Shabbos. And according to the rabbis, you see it in the Mishnah because the rabbis must be the source of this Mishnah because it can't be Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. It has to be the rabbis. And the rabbis are saying that only the Chalil of the Beis HaShoeva, the water drawing, that's not Deicha Shabbos, but that implies that the other music of the daily sacrifice, that is Deicha Shabbos. And if that does override Shabbos, it comes out that everyone agrees that the daily music does override Shabbos. So we've proven Rav Yosef wrong from our Mishnah, even in that case of the daily music. Okay, now we're up to the question of Jeffrey, which is what is the whole source of Iker Shira B'Peh or Iker Shira B'Kli? And that's the new Gemara that we're up to. My Taima, we're up to the Gemara My Taima. We're on page 51a. About 20 lines from the bottom, maybe. It's 5, 10, 15, maybe about 18 to 20 lines up from the bottom of the page. My Taima, what's the reason? Demanda Amar Iker Shira B'Kli. What's the reason of the opinion that Iker Shira, that the main music is the instruments? What would the source be? Now, what's interesting is we don't know the name. We don't have names of who holds this. Who is the source of these opinions? Iker Shira B'Peh, Iker Shira B'Kli. We thought we had a source originally when Rav Yosef explained the Mishnah. He sort of clarified. One is Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, the other is the rabbis. But the Gemara, knocked that off. And so now we're basically we know there seems to be these two ways of understanding the music, but we don't have a clear names to who these people are. We could maybe guess, but it's not. But the Gemara doesn't really give it a name. The Gemara just says what is the reason of this opinion. So Iker Shira is with instruments. What's our source? Where do we have such a source that the main music is instruments? Like for example, if we want to come up with a source with the author of this opinion, we could say that this is, everyone seems to hold this way. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba said that everyone agrees that it's Deicha Shabbos, that the daily music overrides Shabbos with instruments. So you could say, well, that might fit with that seems to fit, that the main shira is B'Kli. Instruments are very important, significant, and therefore they override Shabbos. So you could theoretically say that, but it's not definite, because you could say that they don't necessarily hold that way. Even if they hold that the main shira is B'Peh, they could still hold that it overrides Shabbos. It's still significant, even though it's not the main song, but it's still significant enough to override Shabbos. Ain't Shabbos b'Mikdash. There's no rabbinic decrees on the Beis HaMikdash, and we will allow music to override Shabbos in the Beis HaMikdash. You still could say that. There is an opinion in Gemara Tainus where it does have a name of Reb Shimon ben Elazar there that does actually hold this view. So you could say maybe that's the view that we're referring to. But in any event, the Gemara accepts that there must be someone who holds this. And what would the reason be? Ikar Shira is Bekli. So the Gemara says Dechsiv, because there's a pasuk in Divrei Yomim. This is all about actually what we're learning in Malachim, Beis, the end. So we're learning about how Chizkiah HaMelech had fixed the desecration and the terrible things that were done by his father Achaz. What was one of the things that was done? Achaz locked up the Beis Hamikdash. He said, "I don't want anyone going here." And when Chizkiah came and changed things around, in fact, it says that the Kohanim were like shocked. They didn't even know if they could trust him. They thought maybe there's some trick because his father locked everything up. All of a sudden, Chizkiah says, "No, we're gonna now open everything up to Beis Hamikdash." He says, "Vayomer Chizkiah said, Lahalois ha'oila lahamizbeach. We're gonna bring sacrifices to the mizbeach. Ubeis heichel ha'oila." And when they started bringing the oila, heichel shir Hashem, they started the songs for Hashem. The trumpets, Vayadei Klei David Melech Yisrael, through the music, through the instruments of David, the king of Israel. So what we see over here is that they restarted this music that was through the music was done through the instruments. So what it shows is that that's the main part of the music of the Beis Hamikdash. Is the Klei David Melech Yisrael. That's the Shir Hashem. In other words, the pasuk is explaining what is this Shir Hashem. The pasuk is saying through the Klei David Melech Yisrael, through the vessels of the David, the King David. That's how we're gonna fulfill the Shir Hashem, the song of Hashem. Now, the Gemara says, okay, that's one source, that Shira is Bekli, that you need musical instruments. And what's the other source? That it's Bepeh. My taima demanda Amar, Ikar Shira Bepeh. What's the reason of the opinion that the Ikar Shira is with vocals is the Ikar Shira? And again, who's the source of this opinion? So seemingly, if you look at on the top of the page, we had the fact that you could have Avodim, you could have Yisraelim. So that would make sense that they hold, the way at least the Gemara sort of clarified it, that everyone holds Ikar Shira is Kulei Alma Ikar Shira Bepeh, the Gemara said. Everyone holds Ikar Shira is Bepeh, that all those opinions hold that the main Shira is with vocals, and therefore you for sure could have Avodim as the musicians. But the question is what they did have, and that was the way the Gemara explained it. So those rabbis, Reb Meir, Reb Yossi, and Reb Chanina ben Antignos, would seemingly be the authors of this opinion, that the main shira is bepeh, the main song is with vocals. And what would be the source for that? It's also a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, different chapter. It says, T'chsiv, as it says, Vayihi ke'echad l'mechatzitrim l'mechatzitrim. Not an easy word to pronounce. L'lamashayrim la'ashmiya koil echad. So they the songs of the Levium and the Beis Hamikdash, they blowed the trumpet, and they were mashayrim. They sang to give one koil echad, one sound or one voice to praise Hashem. And it doesn't mention musical instruments; rather, it mentions the mashayrim. Sounds like it's only vocals. Now it does say chatzotzres, machatzitzrim, which sounds like they did have a trumpet, but that trumpet was more tekiah through a tekiah. You know, that was to blow the blast, not really music. And so the Meshayrim sounds like it's just bepeh. That's the that's the understanding. Rashi says the chatzaitres were not a klishir; they were for tekiyos of the Talmud and the Musaf. So that's the understanding. Now the Gemara is not satisfied because each rabbi or each opinion we have a pasuk for. So what does one pasuk? What does one opinion do with the other pasuk? What does that opinion do with the opposite pasuk? So the Gemara says v'idach nami, in the other opinion also, that says that the shira is the peh. What does he do with the if vocals is the main thing? What does he do with the earlier pasuk that we said? Haksiv vayom Chizkiyo. We had that pasuk of Chizkiyo saying that we have to do the Shir Hashem through the instruments. So the Gemara answers Hachikam. This is what it means. Hachil Shir Hashem b'peh. Start the songs of Hashem with the vocals, and Al Yadei Klei David Melech Yisrael Levasume Kolo, to beautify the sound. You also use background music or accompaniment music to besume kala, to make it pleasuresome, to make the sound pleasuresome. They would have music, but that wasn't the ikar. The ikar was the word Shir Hashem, the song of Hashem. That was the main thing, and it was accompanied by the musical instruments. That's the way that other opinion would explain this verse. V'idach nami, in the other opinion as well. What does he do with with that other verse? Haksiv, doesn't it say Vayihi ke'echad l'mechatzitzrim v'lameshayrim? Doesn't it say that over there it mentions the meshayrim and it doesn't mention any instruments? So why would you think that instruments are significant? Why does it mention it? And so the Gemara says, it sounds, not that they weren't instruments, but that they weren't the main thing. It sounds like the main thing was the meshayrim. Meshayrim is the shir, the vocals. So the Gemara says, Hachikam meshayrim dum yolam machatzitzrim. That the meshayrim are similar to the machatzitzrim, and ma machatzitzrim bekli, af meshayrim bekli. That just like the machatzitzrim were with a instrument. So meshayrim also means with the instruments, and so even though it doesn't mention instruments, there was also an important part, and it leaves it out because it doesn't need to say it, because it uses the word machatzitzrim and meshayrim next to each other, that it would allow you to learn from the machatzitzrim that the meshayrim also include kalim, include instruments, and so that would be the sources of this of instruments. Anyway, so bottom line is that we seem to have two ways of learning. If the ikar shira is b'peh, ikar shira is b'kli, we have sources, the different ways of learning the psukim, and each opinion seems to rely on has their source and has an explanation of how to learn the other pasuk. Okay, now comes the next Mishnah. Person who didn't see the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, who didn't see this water drawing ceremony, never saw real joy in his life. And one of the commentaries mentions over here that means didn't see real joy in his life because you had the tremendous joy, number one, of the music, dancing, and so on. But in addition, it was also a simcha ruchnius. It was also spiritual. So you had the gashmias simcha and the ruchnius simcha, because they, as we saw in Taisvus, he brought a Yerushalmi that said that they would draw down Ruach HaKodesh. Yaina got Ruach HaKodesh from the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. So Shoeva comes from the word drawing Ruach HaKodesh. So it's the person who didn't see the Simchas Beis HaShoeva never saw Simcha, real Simcha Miyamav, didn't see a full joy in his day. Now, but Moitzi Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag, at the end of the first day of Yom Tov, when the first day of Yom Tov went out, that would be the proper literal translation. When the first day of Yom Tov went out, might say Yom Tov. So Yardu le'ezras nashim, they would go down from the Ezras Yisrael, from the Koyanim, the Leviim. They would go down from where they were in the Beis Hamikdash to the Ezras Nashim, and Masaknin Sham Tikkun Gadol. They would make over there a big fixing, which basically means they would prepare the Azara. They would prepare it for this ceremony. Menayres Shel Zahav Hayusham. There were golden candelabras over there. The Arba'as Falim, and there were 4 bowls Shel Zahav Berashehem of gold in there at the tops of these menorahs. And there were 4 ladders for each of them, meaning each of the bowls had a ladder. That the Koyanim, it says Va'arba Yeladim Mipirchei Kahuna, 4 lads of the young ones of the Koyanim, they would go up those ladders of Yedeim Kadim Shel Meya V'Yesrim Lug, and in their hands they had pitchers of 120 lug, which basically means each one, there were each of the 4 had a portion of that 120 lug, which means they each had 30 lug, 30 of these 30 lugs that they would have, and they would use shein matilin l'chol seifel, the seifel, and they would pour into each of the bowls. I guess we should stop here. My time is up. Okay, have a wonderful Shabbos, everyone, and it's Hashem to be continued on Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a good Shabbat.
Okay.
Rabbi.